And welcome everybody to our Facebook Live. If you haven't been before, I'm Lisa. I'm our Training and Communication Manager at SARSAS, and we are a local rape crisis centre. That means that we support anyone who's experienced any rape or sexual abuse at any point in their lives, and we campaign and we raise awareness. And today we are talking to DI Ness from Bluestone. Get it right. I did demote you in Art of Literature. Sorry. And Ness is going to be chatting to us about Operation Bluestone. If you've got any questions or comments, put them in the comments section and they'll be filtered through. Also, it's worth noting that Ness can't really talk about live cases today. So if that's something you do need support with, hang around and we'll put some links at the end. Is that about right, Ness?
Yeah, that's good. I would say you promoted me now, so I'm a DS. Detective Sergeant, but it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter.
By the end of this, after your amazing answer, who knows? If anything is possible. What's we can aim high.
Yeah, exactly.
So tell us all a bit about what is Operation Bluestone.
Yeah, okay. So I guess the short answer is that it's Operation Bluestone is the Avon and Somerset Police response to improving the way that we investigate rape and serious sexual offences, and the aim is simply to improve outcomes for victims of this crime. So this has come really from acknowledgement. We had to acknowledge that we were getting it really badly wrong. And we were really doing, inadvertently, really just doing a disservice to victims of this type of crime. So about a year ago, we set up a small team. We were given a small pool of resources, and we set up a small team to deal with a very specific issue, which was huge delays in responding to people that were reporting non-recent offences. So anything.
What sort of delays are we talking there?
Well, I mean, it could be days, weeks, but in worst case scenario, up to sort of a month. So having sort of taken the step to make the report, that some of those people were going sort of days, weeks, potentially, I hate to say it, months without contact from the police. So that was the specific reason for our small gang of people to be set up. So as I said, it was a tiny little team, but it was a really kind of dedicated bunch of people that were specialist investigators that wanted to tackle that particular problem, which is what we began to do. It was kind of fortunate for us that actually the national picture started to change. I think nationally we began to recognise that this was an area that we were getting wrong, the police in general, and we were really fortunate to receive some funding, which initiated Project Bluestone, which was essentially an academic research project. So we had some leading academics come into the force, look at what we were doing, and provided us ultimately with recommendations. It was all an evidence-based research, and they came back and they said, look, this is proven, to work. So the outcome of that is that we there were 5 pillars basically that they were looking at, and it was around suspect-focused investigations. It was about targeting and disrupting repeat offenders. Victim engagement was key, development and welfare of police officers as well, but also using data and performance management to really analyse information that we had and build pictures. So they looked at those areas and came back to us and said, well, okay, scrap what you've been doing because it's not great, but here are some recommendations. And as a force, that's absolutely what we've embraced.
And can you
going forward,
because I'd love to know some more about what those recommendations on those 5 pillars were.
Sure. So I mean, the key ones, I guess, are around the offender-centric approach and the victim engagement, and that is what has shaped our team. So what we have now as a team is an engagement team, which kind of speaks for itself. That's the team that I'm one of the sergeants from at the moment. And the offender-centric team. So we've called it the disruption team. So instead of those being 2 strands of an investigation, they run in parallel, they run simultaneously. So we're dealing with the suspect at the same time as we're engaging with the victim and helping to support them. And as I said, my team the engagement team, that is their sole focus, on supporting victims, on helping them to gather their evidence, and to kind of keep them in the loop, keep them updated, keep them informed, whilst the disruption team will focus primarily on the suspect, but will ultimately be in overall charge of the investigation. So it really a gold standard is how it's been labelled, is the gold standard approach to investigating.
I think people are going to be really interested to hear more about that focus on offenders. How does that work? What does that look like in practice?
So, I mean, simply, it's about turning our investigations on their head and focusing on the actions of the offender rather than the victim. I think it's been easy in the past because the first report usually comes from the victim's perspective, and so we kind of build the narrative on that. But actually, what we're told and what we're seeing is that actually we should be focusing on the actions of the suspect, so the person that's gone out and targeted an individual, and why they've done what they've done. So it's kind of the switch from we were talking about an ad campaign previously about a woman out running being told not to go running on her own. Instead of putting that message out, we're saying, well, actually, it's not about telling women that they can't go running or to be careful when they go running. It's about targeting the people that are likely to offend against them. So it's that kind of, yeah, exactly.
Brilliant.
It's that. What we know is that a large, yeah, no, absolutely. What we know is that a large proportion of named suspects, have previously linked to other sexual offending. So that's where the data analysis comes in. We can start building pictures, and we can start to be proactive and start to disrupt and target those people.
And how do you disrupt it? It kind of reminds me of who's that mobster in America that got done on tax evasion?
Yeah, Al Capone.
Al Capone, is it that kind of thing? How are you disrupting these?
I mean, potentially, yeah. We're thinking a little bit more widely than, person makes a report, we take their account, we then arrest the offender or the suspect, and we interview them, because we can utilize other means, civil orders, things like sexual risk orders. We can potentially, we have an offender management unit, who are an absolute wealth of knowledge, and I don't think we've quite made the connection previously, and we perhaps haven't linked with them as well as we could have done.
And just thinking about civil orders and sexual offence orders, because there'll be a lot of people that won't know what those mean.
Yeah, no, fair enough.
No, that's okay. Every sector's got its weird jargon.
Yeah, no, you're right. So I mean, a sexual risk order, for example, is an order that could be obtained through the civil court. It's a different burden of proof. So for a criminal investigation, we need to prove beyond reasonable doubt that, first of all, that's the person that's responsible, and that that's what happened. So the proof, or the burden of proof, is lower. So it's just other options, where we find that we're in a position where we perhaps haven't got enough evidence to prosecute in a criminal court. It's just being creative about other ways of dealing with the issue. There are organisations out there that can, outside of the police, that can provide services to people that are inclined to sexual offending, even if they haven't been convicted. So it's looking at our partner agencies externally. And you're right, other things that, other criminality that they may be involved in, that actually we could, disrupt and target to the sort of, for the greater good, I suppose.
That's really, really useful. I think loads of people find that really interesting, that there's these creative methods.
Yeah.
Kind of essentially, it's about prevention, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. It's making us think as well. It's not a process. It's not a tick box. We have to think about the decisions that we're making, and could we do things differently? So it's good.
And are you seeing an impact from this new approach that you're taking?
I think, to be honest, it's probably too early to say. Like I said, we've only really been up and running for a month now. But what I can say is that we know that there's a 25% increase in the number of referrals that the police are making to the Crown Prosecution Service. So we're approaching them with cases that, we're saying, look, we want some advice on this, or we want you to think about, prosecution in this case. So we know that we've increased our referrals to the CPS.
Oh, brilliant. And that kind of leads me on to one of my next questions. Everyone watching will be aware of the kind of the big media story about the low conviction rates at the moment. So there might, we know that for some people reporting will never be the right option for them, but there may be people who would like to report but are maybe being put off by feeling that maybe there's no point, or there are too many hurdles in their way. What would you want to say to them?
I mean, I guess the first thing is to acknowledge that we know that we were getting it wrong, and we know that we've let people down, and that's not what any of us in the team right now, that is not what we wanted, and it's it's quite painful to hear that, and to know that we weren't doing a great job. I think where we're at now is that we've got a really strong will to learn, a really strong will to change, and a really strong will to get better. And part of that is also around working with partner agencies, and the key partner agency for us in terms of prosecution is the CPS. What I would say about that is that we have really built a good relationship now with the part of the CPS that prosecutes those rape and serious sexual offences. It wasn't always that way, and it could be a little bit adversarial, the relationship between the police and the CPS. But there's been a huge amount of work that's gone into that, which means that we're working much more collaboratively now. We're much more supportive of each other, and of course that is always going to lead to better outcomes. Aside from that, I'll never promise at the start of an investigation that it will lead to a prosecution. We can never promise an outcome. The one promise that I can make, though, is that the response from my team, certainly from Bluestone, will always be compassionate. It'll always be supportive, and it'll always be professional. And what we want to happen is for the people that make the reports, the victims of these crimes, we want them to feel that they've been listened to. We want them to feel that they've got the best outcome that they possibly could from an investigation. So the support always will be there, and the officers will always be compassionate and professional.
And I know back in the old day when we had Bluestone, you had state officers who were your support officers. What's your support officer role like now?
Well, that's the engagement team now, essentially. So the engagement team, my team, are essentially, in old money, state officers. We don't use that term anymore. It's it's defunct. We've moved on from those days.
Everyone watching will know what that means, because I've just used one of those acronyms that I said.
I mean, SAIT was a sexual abuse investigation team, and and the officers that came from SAIT were very much in the same mould. It was all about engagement and support and everything else, and really focusing on the victim in the crime. So in that respect, I guess not a lot has changed, but we really want to move forward. So whilst Bluestone back then was great, it was amazing, we can make it better. So yeah, we're trying to move away from that. But essentially, my engagement officers play exactly the same role.
And really worth noting that when people are engaging with yourselves, or whether they're not engaging with yourselves, there are lots of local support services they can still be accessing. I mean, for example, SARSAS, we do pre-trial therapy. So there was a bit of a myth, I think, that if you wanted to have counselling, you'd have to stop when you went through the reporting process, but that's obviously not the case anymore.
No.
Is that your understanding as well?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, how are we going to engage people if we bar that? Because clearly this is probably one of the most traumatic experiences you can go through, and so not to receive any emotional or counselling support would be crazy. I mean, all I would say about that is that when the disclosures are bound to be made during counselling, and it would be a conversation to be had with an engagement officer and the individual to talk about access to records, because there might be relevant information in there that could be supportive of the investigation, but equally we also have to be open and honest about anything that might I don't know, undermine or be difficult for us. It's never fatal. We just need to be open and transparent about it.
That feels like a whole nother session about note taking.
Yeah, totally.
It's very more complicated than any of us ever realised. So thinking about someone that's considering calling 999 for something current, or 101 for something not recent, I think we all kind of have these quite dramatic ideas of what happens when you call the police, like that someone's going to like blues and twos around your house, it's going to be like The Bill, or that's quite old, there's probably some is it like that? What's going to happen when someone makes that call?
Not necessarily. I suppose the first thing is to say is that there are lots of different routes into reporting. You know, we work really closely with people like yourselves, but SafeLink and the ISVA services, so independent sexual violence advisors, and often we get anonymous reports that come through those organisations. That's perfectly fine too. You know, if you make a self-referral through to SafeLink or whoever, you know, because you're not sure about whether to report to the police or not, you know, they're incredibly supportive. And we receive reports from them where they say, look, the client wants to remain anonymous at the moment, but would like to know a little bit more. Can we give them some more information? Or they would like it recorded, but don't really want to take anything further at the moment. That is all cool. That is absolutely fine. And we're more than happy to take those reports.
And we'll put a link to that website where you can put those reports in the chat.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
The tech support will get on that.
Yeah. And you know, and direct reports to the police, as you're alluding to there, you know, that's possible to do anonymously. I mean, what I would say about that is that we would like the opportunity to be able to address the offender behaviour, like we talked about earlier. And so, you know, if the person felt comfortable disclosing the identity of the offender, that we would always ask for that, because that gives us that opportunity to disrupt. But aside from that, you know, you've identified 101 999. I mean, always in an emergency 999. And if something is happening there and then, and you know, particularly if we believe that, you know, a suspect is, or an offender is still at the scene, then you might get that blues and twos response, and it might be that dramatic, you know, officers in uniform coming in police cars with lights and sirens. It might be that, but more often than not, it's not that. You know, and specifically where you know, somebody has kind of taken that brave step to make the report about something that happened a long time ago, you know, that might be via 101, in which case the chances are is that report is likely to come straight to my team or one of the disruption teams, and that person would be contacted by somebody from Bluestone, and we would take them through the process. I suppose the key thing, that all of those cases would be reviewed by a RASO, a rape and serious sexual offences specialist, so a DS like me, who you know is focused on this area of work, and they will set the direction.
I think that's really useful to know that there's different routes, and that some people are very specifically specialised in this area. Just quick check, Lisa, have we had any questions or comments that we need to be addressing through the Facebook page? And if not, you do have time to ask questions. Not yet. Okay, then I can keep asking you all the questions I've got, which loads. Who ends up in a department like yours? What draws people in? Are they handpicked? Do they put themselves forward?
I think it's really important, because you know we're learning through the research project and things like that secondary trauma is an issue for the professionals that respond to these reports. So this isn't an area of work, I think, that you can force somebody into. So all of our people are volunteers. They all want to be here. They're all very driven. I can speak for my team, the engagement team, because I've been working with most of them now for almost a year, and I have to say I'm not sure I've ever worked with such a passionate, dedicated bunch of people, you know, in all my service, and just I've been blown away by their response to the work that we're doing, and you know, how they deal with people, and just the, you know, the compassion and the support that they show people. So I think
that's really
I wouldn't to a degree, yes, they're absolutely handpicked. They're volunteers. Nobody's here, you know, it's not a punishment to be here. It's, you know, the people that want to be here, and the people that are really like passionate about doing a great job.
I'm glad to hear that you're talking about your own well-being, because vicarious trauma is a real issue. And you know, just in support services like our own, we're really aware of it. So it's really nice that trauma-informed approach is coming through to an organisation like yourselves. Great.
It's taken us a while to catch up, but we are there.
I do remember having a chat to police when I first started in SARSAS, like, I don't know, 8 years ago, and saying, what about you guys? Do you have any clinical supervision? They were like, what? So it's coming. We don't want you to burn out.
No, definitely not.
And is there anything else you're really hoping you'd get to chat to us about today?
I don't think so. I think the key thing for me is the message to people that are considering reporting. We're really keen to be victim focused. Shared decision making is really important. So if we're going to discuss that, this is what an investigation looks like, what do you think, what would be helpful to you, rather than saying, right, this is what we're going to do next. Because I think it's really difficult to take that first step, and then it might be quite overwhelming actually then to think about what happens next. So where we can, where the risk allows us to, we will also work at the pace of the person reporting. We won't hurry them, and they'll have time to.
Someone decides that they take that first step and it is a bit overwhelming, and maybe they weren't ready for it, and they decide to stop at that point. What would happen?
Again, it would be a case-by-case basis. In most instances, we would absolutely respect the person's wishes. What we have to focus on is whether there's a wider risk, and actually, do we need to do something, even if we don't continue with this part of the investigation? Do we need to do something to manage that risk? But yeah, I mean, we're really mindful of people's wishes, and as I say, shared decision making is really important. And where we can't share decision making, where we have to, for example, those occasions where we have to sadly say, I'm really sorry, but we're not going to be able to take further action. Though we're making sure that we're explaining that rationale, and that we're updating people, we're keeping them informed. So I think that's the key message. It's we don't make all the decisions, and we really want people to be a part of that.
Oh, brilliant. Well, we haven't got any questions, but I feel like we've covered loads of ground, and so I'm really pleased with everything that we've managed to talk about today. Right. So I think what we'll do is we'll bring it to a close, because I'm aware we're eating into your evening. It's really nice that you've come and you've given us this time. No problem. I want to say a really big thank you, Ness, for coming to chat to us. This will be staying on our Facebook page, and we'll be popping it over on YouTube. So this is there for people to see and to have a think about. And quick question, apparently. I'm waiting. It's coming. That's a really interesting one. Can you say more about the burden of proof?
Yeah, I mean, I
really glad someone asked that.
I don't know what this kind of specific question is, but in terms of a criminal investigation, which this would be, that's what the police do, is that we have to prove to a court, to a really high level, that the person that is in front of the judge and the jury in the Crown Court is guilty of the offence that they're being accused of. So it's just a high standard of proof. It means we have to demonstrate beyond reasonable doubt for that person to be convicted. So I don't know whether that answers the question. I don't know whether that's.
I guess maybe it'd be handy to flesh it out with some kind of not overly specific to cases, but examples of what that building that case might look like. What sort of evidence are you looking for?
Well, okay, so let's say in the difference between a non-recent offence and a rape offence that may have just happened. So, of course, the rape offence that just happened, we've potentially got things like forensic evidence that we might have recovered. So DNA evidence, for example, that would demonstrate that intercourse had taken place or penetration had taken place. We'd obviously have the account and the witness evidence of the victim. Potentially then witnesses that person had disclosed to. On the odd occasion, and it does happen, there are eyewitnesses to the event, so we'd be looking at taking statements there. We could be looking at medical records, we could be looking at digital material, so phone data, text messages, Facebook messages.
Something I was wondering, does the suspect's phone get seized?
Yes, so that's a really good point. So we don't talk about seizing victims' phones. We work with the victim, so we have to have a sensible discussion with a victim about whether there's any relevant material that exists on their phone that would, we would need to obtain for the purpose of an investigation. We might need to take the victim's phone away for a short period of time to be able to download that in an evidential format. But we certainly wouldn't be taking a phone away for sort of days, weeks, months on end, like we used to do, like we have done in the past. That is, again, a thing of the past that's changed. in terms of suspects, you know, suspects that are arrested, you know, we have powers, police powers, so we can seize property, we can take it with from them, you know, without their agreement.
Like
potentially, yeah. So we'd be potentially looking at, you know, and again, we'd be led by the information that we've got. If there was no suggestion that digital data was going to be relevant, then we wouldn't necessarily be needing to obtain it. So there's all of those things, you know. We're looking at CCTV, we're looking at, you know, house to house inquiries. Can we go and knock on neighbours' doors, you know, if they overheard something, particularly in domestic cases and things like that. So lots and lots of things. So we'd be collating all of that evidence to build a picture that the jury in a Crown Court would be sure that that person was guilty.
Someone's asked a follow-up on the phones. Can I ask about phones and whether they have to hand over their phones? And if they're declined due to personal preference, or if they did not provide, would this go against them in a court of law? I think, you know, a very fair question.
Yeah,
a lot of people will feel that maybe there are things that aren't really any of the police's business on their phone, which is fair enough.
So that's a and that's a really valid point. So again, you know, any downloads that we wouldn't just go and conduct a full, there's no such thing as a full download, but a download of all of the available information on that phone. You know, we have to be proportionate about it, and we only want to access material that is relevant to the investigation. So there is a process that we'll go through, and we will explain to the person what it is that we're seeking to obtain from the phone. The short answer is no. You're under no obligation whatsoever to hand the phone over.
Will it go against them though?
The difficulty is if we,
honesty?
Well, if we think, more importantly, actually, if the court thought that there was something on the victim's phone that they were trying to hide. So, for example, the suspect had given an account which said, well, we were exchanging text messages, there was an agreement that X, Y, and Z was going to happen, and we're not, you know, I mean, if we can access it from the suspect's phone, then that's preferable. There's probably not going to be much different on the victim's phone, but the reluctance to hand it over in some cases may be a bit of a concern. But again, it's case by case, and we would sit down and talk through what the relevant material was, why we needed it, and what the implications were if not.
What are the implications if someone has been sharing text and they said, yep, I'm agreeing to X, Y, and Z, because we know that that's not consent, and that consent can be withdrawn at any time. So how does that work for a case? Because, you know, sexting is a normal part of relationships now, and complex part of relationships.
And you know, just touching on what you said there, we were talking about the rape myths and stereotypes, you know, because I don't know, a young woman went out wearing provocative clothing, that meant, you know, she was consenting. Well, how ridiculous. You know, and the same thing goes from what you've just said. It would depend on the issues in the case, if I'm honest. I mean, you know, it shouldn't go against somebody, because if actually we've been able to obtain the conversation by other means, you know, and maybe that was a poor example. I'm just trying to rack my brains for an example.
No, I think it's a really relevant example, because I think that's a lot of this. A lot of instances happen within relationships, within dating, within meetups and hookups, and actually, I think that's quite a real life example. So thank you. I think that's useful.
And of course we've still got to educate juries as well about these rape myths and stereotypes. So if we can avoid, if we can just say, well, look, we've been really transparent and open, and here is all the material, you know, there's nothing here to hide, then we've kind of already overcome that. But you know, there's that education still to be done.
I get the question a lot, and clients are often nervous about this, worried that other relations and communications would be brought up as she asked for it. And I think that's kind of what we're talking about, and that idea of actually no one's asking for it, and focusing on the perpetrator.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you just need to look at a case where, you know, Saturday night in town, and you've got let's say a young female who's really intoxicated, has been separated from her friends, and is sitting on the curbside. She perhaps being sick, you know, but she's probably not looking her best. You've got to ask yourself, haven't you, is that would your average man think, that's the girl that I'd like to take home tonight? You know, the guy that does and then has sex with her, knowing that she probably can't consent because she's so intoxicated, you have to question their motives and have to start thinking, is this a sex offender that we're dealing with? So it's that kind of
shifting that focus back.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
We kind of got distracted by phones, which understandably it's a really really big topic at the moment.
Yeah.
We were talking about burden of proof. We spoke about recent, but a large amount of people we work with have experienced something that's non-recent and may feel like if there's no, and sometimes I think we kind of think that DNA evidence is the be all and end all of everything.
Yeah,
And
it's not.
I think, our working experience tells us it's not. So what sort of evidence would you be looking for in that situation?
Again, much of the same thing. So, often when people report non-recent offences, particularly offences that have happened a long time ago, it's often as a result of a disclosure. So they've been for counselling, or they've had some support from somewhere else, and it's been brought to the fore, and they think, oh, I need to take this step, I need to do this. So we'd potentially be asking them, can we have a look at the counselling records? Because your counsellor will be able to tell us, well, look, this person's been making this consistent disclosure for all of this time. We can access counselling records. Potentially medical records. We would potentially be talking, particularly in familial circumstances. Well, can we talk to other members of the family, who'll be able to talk about the surrounding circumstances? It's just thinking about building a picture. So, just because something has happened a long time ago isn't necessarily a barrier to a prosecution. It does make it more difficult, but actually that's our issue, not theirs.
Someone has asked, you mentioned educating juries. Do they get any sexual violence related training pre-trial?
No, I mean, juries are just members of the public. I'll say just members of the public. They are members of the public, and that is the whole point, is that they're 12 of our peers that come in with not necessarily any legal experience or anything, just to come in, listen to the evidence. What I would say is that obviously the judge, it's not obvious at all, but the judge will give direction in a trial. They'll sum up the evidence and they will give legal directions. So if there is a point of law, then, or potentially in this case, like
the judges have training in this area specifically.
I'm pretty confident that they do. I mean, there are just, I believe, I understand that within the
it's okay
circuit,
if you don't have all the answers to all of our questions, because we really are asking you all the things.
No, I mean, what I would say is that certainly prosecutors and barristers, we have specialist RASO prosecutors and barristers. It kind of follows, it's natural that judges would have similar specialisms as well. So I'm pretty confident that would be the case.
Okay. And if not, that's something for us to campaign for.
Absolutely. Quite right.
Which we're definitely up for. I think that might be all of our questions. Quite an interesting mixed flurry at the end. So again, thank you very much for your time, Ness. I think this has been really helpful, and I really hope that people have got a lot from it. And I'm going to let you head off, so we're going to say bye.
Thank you very much.